Hello and welcome to Commonplace Expertise. Today we're talking to Lesley Sim. Lesley Sim is a marketer, an entrepreneur, and an ultimate coach, ultimate frisbee. In her day, her day job, she runs Newsletter Glue, which is a WordPress plugin business that allows you to run newsletters throughout, whatever WordPress blog you have through the most popular email service providers out there. So you basically can turn your WordPress website into the equivalent of a Substack. More recently, she was the coach for the Singapore Women's Ultimate World Championship team, and that's actually going to be the majority of our conversation today. She is a friend and amazing at pedagogical development, literally one of 3 coaches or teachers I know who are remarkable at pedagogical development. Now, I need to talk a bit about pedagogical development to sort of like set up the conversation to explain why this might be interesting to you. So you probably have heard of something called deliberate practice. And if you're a long-time reader of the blog, you will know that the problem with deliberate practice is that it requires a body of knowledge, training methods to exist in the domain if you want to do pedagogical development. If you want to do deliberate practice. And what that actually means is that there has to be a period of pedagogical development in the field, which is a collection of training methods developed through trial and error, usually by coaches, and then passed down from coach to coach or coach to player. Right? And in many of the domains in which deliberate practice is possible, like chess and tennis and golf, there has been a long period of pedagogical development that has happened. And if you do not have that, like say you try to learn marketing or business or management, then you really cannot do deliberate practice. And this matters, and this is important because deliberate practice remains the gold standard for practice in the world. So you can sort of see why I am very interested in coaches and teachers who are remarkable at pedagogical development, because they are the ones who push the possibilities of training in a field forward. And this is the context for my conversation with Lesley, because Lesley has this remarkable ability to come up with new training methods and to push the boundaries of training in her chosen sport, which in this case is ultimate. So I'm very honored to have this conversation with you, Lesley, and I guess we should get into it. So let's welcome Lesley. Hi, Lesley.
Hello. Thanks for all the nice things that you just said about me.
Yeah, this is a longer introduction than most, I think, because I think people listening to this would be like, what? Probably the first question they might ask is like, what's ultimate frisbee? And maybe we can sort of like start the conversation by talking about what is the sport of ultimate frisbee.
I think another question people might be asking is, what does pedagogy mean?
Oh, that's a good one. Maybe we should talk about pedagogy. Do you want to explain?
Why don't you explain?
Right. So pedagogy is the art of teaching, or like the science of teaching, or teaching well. And there are lots of learning theories out there. And in this particular case, we'll be talking about training and teaching techniques in very competitive, high levels of competition in ultimate. But pedagogy really exists everywhere else. Like if you take a math class, there is some pedagogy that the teacher is using to teach you math. And many people will believe that most math teachers have very bad pedagogy because they hate math. So yeah, that's the context of what pedagogy is. And pedagogical development is the effort of like building and creating new training methods.
Cool.
So, Lesley, what's ultimate?
So, ultimate frisbee is a team sport. It's kind of fluid, like football, in that everyone can run anywhere they want on the field. The field's approximately a third to 2/3 the size of a regular football field. And there are 7 players on each team. And you score in a similar way to rugby or American football, in that there's an end zone and you have to cross the line of an end zone for it to count as a score.
When you cross, if I may ask, like when you cross, is it you have to catch it when you're in the end zone? Because you cannot run when you catch a disc, right?
So you can't run with the disc.
Wow.
You can only you run and then like the disc is thrown and then you like kind of catch it. So you can't run with the disc, and you cannot like you cannot move with the disc. You can establish a pivot foot, and then you can pivot. So like you can establish a pivot foot, and then you can pivot.
Yeah.
But that other foot can't move.
Oh wow.
If not, that's a travel. Yeah. And another thing that people are often interested in is that it's generally self-refereed. So meaning you are your own gatekeeper. So how it works is, let's say you punch me in the face, then I call
My God.
I call a foul, and then you have the choice, or do you have the option to contest the foul or don't contest the foul. So if you don't contest the foul, then the fact that you punched me in the face and I call a foul, so the foul stands, and then it's a turnover. If you contest the foul, then the play, then it like depending on like what happened and all that, who has the disc and all that, then like the play actually continues. There's like slight, you like might have to like restart the play or so forth, but basically there isn't like, I guess, a huge disadvantage if you call a no contest. So you can see how like spirit of the game and like sportsmanship is quite important, because it's like completely possible to ruin a game by just like going around punching people. Everyone's like concussed on the floor, and then you're like no foul for everything, no contest for everything, and then you can like win in that way. But I mean, it very quickly breaks the whole game lah.
My goodness. Like, so if there's a punch,
I mean, that never actually no, it doesn't
happens,
happen,
right?
but I mean, I'm just giving like an extreme example.
Yeah, I guess this is really insane. Like, how do you prevent given this self-governing context, right? Like, how do you prevent it from turning into a debate match?
No, it happens. So like
foul?
one of the worst experience, I've had like two really bad experiences. One was where we had like, so there's this concept of a spirit captain. Typically their job is to, I guess, like be in charge of this whole, like regulate this whole problem of self-referee things. And so like I've had this like experience where the two spirit captains are like standing on the field. One has like brought out the rule book, like a physical copy of the rule book, and they're like arguing while the game is going on, while the time is going on. And it's, like that was horrible.
That's so
that was like one experience that was really bad. And then the other experience was the other team got so violent, it actually got a bit scary to go on the field. They would be like clotheslining people, and then say like no contest. I mean, they would contest the foul. Sorry, so that means they disagree with the call. So they contest the foul, and the game just broke. And the amazing thing was that after the game, they still wanted to trade jerseys and stuff. So I think like that's genuinely how they always play, and like they thought that it was normal, and like our entire team was like completely dispirited, like just like that was like the worst game of our lives, and they were like, hey, like let's trade jerseys.
Which
I shouldn't say which teams. Yeah, they were both teams from other countries.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Like just so people know, like when you play Ultimate in Singapore, you're not likely to meet one of these teams. So okay,
I think you still have like poorly spirited teams in Singapore as well. So
sure.
Yeah, sorry, we went off on a whole tangent. It's also something that I'm very passionate about, as you can see.
No, but this is really interesting, right? Because I think most people, when they think of like if you describe the sport to them, like, oh, this is the sport of Ultimate, it's like football, they'll be like, oh, there will be a referee, and then you're like, no, there's no referee. Which is surprising.
So there's a concept called observers, which you have at some higher level games. So observers can kind of tell you what they saw, so what they observed, but they can't enforce it necessarily. So they can't like say, they can't uphold anything that they've observed. It's up to the players to agree to uphold what the observer saw.
My goodness. And if I'm not mistaken, the observer also takes time, right? Because like in the World Championships, you don't want to have a debate match in the middle.
So the observer also tries to like keep things moving quickly.
Right. you've mentioned actually, and this is, I know this is sort of a bit of a tangent, but I think it's useful to sort of talk about it. You've mentioned that this is actually part of the ethos of Ultimate, and there's a philosophical bend to the self-governing aspect. Could you talk a bit more about that?
So every player is a referee. So every player needs to know the rules, and if you so actually to even sign up for a world championship, you're required to take a quiz to prove that you know the rules, and you're required to like show your like quiz completion certificate to show that you know the rules. So that's number one.
insane.
Number two, if you open the rule book, page 1 of the rule book is spirit of the game. So this like whole concept of sportsmanship is part of the rules. So being a good sportsman is in the rules, which I think is really cool. So it's like really, really kind of inculcated and ingrained into the sport itself. Yeah.
That's okay. And like, has there been push to professionalize the game, to like create referees?
Yeah, so in America, they have this thing called AUDL, which is like a semi-professional disc league. And I think they have referees there. They have like quite a few different rules. Like, I guess like most obviously the size of their field is bigger, and they have referees. But obviously I've never played AUDL. It's a professional league in America, so I've never played that. So I can't say how their referees work and stuff. But yeah, I guess so that has been one of the
Right.
Ways to professionalize. I can't say I necessarily agree, to be
Right,
honest,
so-
but
Okay.
yeah.
Interesting. Why?
I just think that like the self-referee thing and like spirit of the game thing is such a huge part of the game. So when you remove it, it's like you're removing the spirit of the game. You're removing like this like key part of the game and what makes it special. So I think like observers, for example, is a really good balance, like way to have some kind of impartial person without changing the way the game is played. Because so basically, like the moment you have a referee, then, and this is going to go into something that I hope we talk about later, about like, are you playing the game or are you like, are you following the rules? Yeah.
Yes.
So like, as part of the rules of the game, the moment you have a referee, it's like, for example, in basketball, right? Like there are 3 fouls and then you get sent off. And like ideally, like you shouldn't have any fouls, but because you have the referee there, and because you've set 3 fouls, so people count the 3 fouls as a part of the way to play the game. Which
Right.
is, again, if you're playing to win, that you necessarily have to do that. But if you're trying to uphold like the concept of spirit of the game and sportsmanship, then you shouldn't do that. And being self-regulated kind of encourages you to not foul someone purposefully, whereas the moment you have a referee, then you've encouraged people to go as close to the line as possible, and like how much can I get away with without the referee seeing. So the whole ethos changes quite a bit, I think.
And that is not to say, so we will get to this for sure, since you brought it up. You were the person who actually gave me the whole concept of like play to play versus play to win. You put the words to the concept. I was sort of like reflecting on just to sort of go back to what you say about like how the penalties become part of the meta game.
That's normal, right? Like in professional sports. Yeah.
It is normal. It's normal. It is like, and you're saying it doesn't really happen in Ultimate.
Exactly. Because it's self-referee.
But there is still a meta game.
But like you like kind of intentionally fouling someone as part of the meta game is like so hugely frowned upon that most people don't do it. I mean, of course, there are going to be people and teams who do it, but it's like it's like a big deal when teams do it.
Wow. Okay, this is really interesting. Because like this happened in judo, so I play judo, and we've talked, a lot of our conversations about sport has been like sort of like I talk about the metagame in judo. Maybe we should define the metagame. What is the metagame?
I don't know. What is the metagame? I guess it's.
We both know what the metagame is, but
Yeah.
we can't define it.
I guess it's like the. I don't know. How would you define it?
Okay, I'll define it, and then I would like to
Okay.
hear like what the metagame is in Ultimate. So the metagame, in my view, is the game above the game. Where the game is like the rules of the game when you're trying to win in Ultimate. It's like, it's like football. You're seven aside, right? And then like you're trying, and all the nature of the game. But then the meta game is like what strategies currently win, and like what do you call it? And then there's like maybe there's like 3 or 4 strategies, and right now the dominant strategy that everybody plays is this one, which gives you an advantage to like choose a different strategy. And understanding the shape of the metagame, understanding what the state of play is and the strategies that different teams use, it's always an evolving thing. And at any given point, the optimal strategy might be, slightly different from what it was last year. So what is the metagame in Ultimate?
Can I just say what you said?
No. Like in practice, like over the course of your Ultimate career, what have you seen? How has it evolved? How has the metagame evolved?
In some ways, okay, so I should preface this by saying the last time that I played at a highly competitive level was 2016. And the last time I coached was, I guess, 2020. We got cut off because of COVID. And so I would say that like there's probably lots, like any like hardcore like been to multiple world championships Ultimate player listening to this might be like, oh, she's missed this and she's missed that, and like the reason is because the last world championships I went to was 2016. So in my view, I would say that a lot of the metagame, a lot of like strategy and stuff hasn't changed drastically over the past 10-15 years. So there's like only a handful of stacks that have kind of a stack is like a formation. So there's only a handful of formations that have stood the test of time. There's many that have like come and gone, or like some of the like concepts of some of them have been infused into the ones that have stood the test of time. I think I don't know how to talk about this without going into like so much detail that people wouldn't understand.
No, do it.
Oh, okay.
Go into the detail because we will. Just do it.
Okay,
It's
so one of my favorite like little things that I'm not sure if it's a metagame, but it's like this throw. So the Japanese, I would say maybe 10 years ago or something, an actual Japanese player would be able to correct me, but so Japanese players or like Asians tend to be shorter than Americans, right? And so
yes.
they cannot compete just on like straight lines, like sprint, jump, catch a disc and score. So you can't compete if you're just trying to do that. So what the Japanese did is they invented a throw that is curving away from both the player and their defender. So that makes it significantly harder for the offensive receiver to catch it, but it also makes it significantly harder for the defense to defend it. And the one advantage that the offensive player has over the defense is that they know it's coming, and secondly, they can train for it during practice. The other like big problem with the throw is that it's extremely hard to do. Like it takes a good thrower maybe 2-3 years to get good at it and use it in a high level game. And so like we first started seeing it, I don't know, maybe again like 5 to 10 years ago. It's very cool. So like let's say again, I don't know how to explain it, but like so like let's say the throw is here and the person running is like going towards the camera, right? So like ideally what you want is the disc to just go straight and then you run onto the disc and you catch it. So that's like the most ideal, but that's the kind of thing that an American player might be able to outrun or outjump a shorter Japanese player. So like that's not an ideal throw when you're going up against an American. So what they invented was a throw that goes this way. So you're running straight and the throw goes here and it kind of like fades away this way. So you have to be able to fade away with the throw and kind of catch it.
Oh god.
Yeah, it's really hard. So you have to like time the fade like of the run, because if you fade too early, then the defense knows, and then like there's space for the defense as well to catch it.
Right. Have you ever used or played with somebody who could use? Who could do
Yeah.
this throw?
So I've had the luxury of playing with quite a few Japanese people, and so they can like, because it's like been in their culture and style of playing for years, so a lot of them can do it. And so what's been interesting is like over time you see other countries like try to adopt this throw. So like I'd say Australians are pretty good at it now. They are especially good at using it in the end zone, like shorter version of the throw. A handful of Singaporeans can do it. I haven't really seen that many Americans do it yet. Again, because like their style of play is more, I'm going to be bigger, better, faster. And so if that's, you don't necessarily have to do this like riskier throw that requires more finesse and blah 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 blah. But yeah, it's a beautiful way of playing.
Which we are going to talk about. But sort of just to sort of wrap up this section as introduction to Ultimate, could you like sort of give a postcard or a small snapshot version of how you got into the game?
So I started. The first time I ever touched a frisbee was in Singapore at a tennis court. Randomly, someone appeared with a frisbee. I was playing captain's ball, which is like a variation of netball, and popular in Singapore. And someone appeared with a frisbee, and it was really, really fun. And then I was studying in university in Sydney at the time, and so I joined the sport in uni, and then started playing in the leagues there in Sydney. So they have like a lot of nighttime leagues, which is really nice. People actually get off at 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. in Australia, and like in Singapore, and so by 6 p.m. you can start playing already. So yeah, I played a lot of leagues there, which was really fun. And then I came back to Singapore, played a few leagues, and then joined a club team here in Singapore called Freak Show. And then I was part of that for maybe 10 years, 10 or more years, depending on whether you include the time when I wasn't in Singapore and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, so I played in three world championships, many international games, maybe like 50, 60, 70 international tournaments. Captained and coached for some of those years. And I think like one of the cool things is that I've had the opportunity to play on a lot of teams from many different countries. And so like the kind of understanding everybody's different like philosophical approaches to the game makes me a more complete player, I would say, and coach. Everyone has like completely different styles, which is very, very fascinating. Even the tournament structure is very different, which is fun. So like in Japan, for example, they have a tournament where if you win, the prize is a box of cabbages. Because like the competition because the tournament is like held in this place where I think like they're famous for their cabbages or something, so like you win a box of cabbages.
Have you tasted these cabbages? Are they really, really very good?
No. I haven't tried. But yeah, so like there's a whole bunch of like different quirks and stuff, which is pretty cool.
That's so cool. Yeah. Could you like sort of give two examples of a style? When you said that there's many different countries, many different styles. Could you talk a bit about like two styles, say? So
my favorites are Japan and Australia. So the Australian style is very, and again, like this might have changed since I last played, but as of 2016, which was a long time ago, but as of 2016, they have a very like free-flowing style, which I really love, and it's heavily based on spatial awareness. So what that means is instead of having like strict formations, American football style, they have like understanding of, okay, if you are here, then this is the next live space versus dead space, and like this is where the disc is flowing towards, and like so I should either head there with the intention of catching the next pass, or I should stay out of that way because like my timing might be a bit off and I don't want to clog the area. So like when you watch them play, it looks like, if you're not familiar with that style of playing, it looks like madness. And it's if you are from a more regimented style of playing, it can be hard to kind of slot yourself in because no one will be able to tell you where to go at any given point in time. It's like all based on feel. And I think the reason why they play this way is because most Australians grow up playing sports, grow up playing team sports, and so they have like if like by the time you play Ultimate at the age of 20, you've had like 15 years or something playing netball or football or footy and things like that, then like you already understand space really, really well, and so you just kind of apply that directly into Ultimate Frisbee. So that's been really, really cool. I really enjoy playing that way. And then the other style is Japanese. So I've only ever played with like Japanese teams with a strong mix of Western influence. So I can't say that I know like very strictly how Japanese team plays, but everything about it is slightly different. So the way that so the term that I'm going to use is dump, but basically what it is when your disc is on the sideline, it becomes very squishy to try to progress the disc on the sideline, which is what the defense wants and what you don't want. So you try to kind of bring the disc out from the sideline with like a kind of a little throw to get it closer to the center of the field, and that's called a dump. And most American or Singaporean or Western style of playing has a very like specific way of dumping, and the Japanese angles and like distances which they would judge as ideal are very, very different from the rest of the world. And then like I said, they have that like whole curving thing that they do, and they throw a lot more blades. So blades are like discs that go up and down like very aggressively, and it's for that same reason, like if you can throw it like pinpoint it and like straight to your head kind of thing, you like catch it there, it's hard to defend against, but it's very hard to throw, and it's very hard to throw accurately, and it's even harder to throw in the wind. So it's just quite different. And obviously the Japanese are like quite regimented in the way they play, and they have very, very specific people who do very, very specific things. So completely different styles of play.
Okay, that's brilliant. So we've just spent like 30 minutes just setting up the no, but this is necessary, and I think because we're talking about a sport at a very high level of play, and maybe I think like a good sort of into the training pedagogical development section of this conversation is to sort of talk about the challenges that you have when you started taking on the women's world championship team, right? Like, what was the starting point, and then you have to get them to like this incredibly high level of play, and not all of them I think were experienced players, right? So could you talk a bit about like what's the story there?
The story is I had retired from frisbee for a long time, and they were looking for people to take on the mantle of coach, and it's traditionally not something most people are keen to do. So the problem with frisbee is that it's not a professional sport, so you're not paid to do any of it. So imagine you are coaching without even getting to play, so you don't get the fun of playing, you're just coaching, and you have to do it on a volunteer basis, and a lot of times, especially Singaporeans who are notoriously very complainy, so they complain a lot. So you're like, spending hours and hours of your time, dedicating, easily 10-20 hours a week of your time to coach a bunch of people who are complaining about your incompetence all the time. So not a lot of people want to do it. And then so they asked me. I agreed to do it if I could get a handful of people, because I had already been thinking about forming a women's team to coach for a while. And the bigger story there is I feel like I've benefited a lot from the life lessons that I took away from playing Ultimate, both as a player and as a captain and as a coach. So my thoughts there are that because it's amateur sport, the barriers to entry are quite low. Anyone can join, and also assuming that you've spent the necessary amount of time to work your way up, it's not impossible to be put in a leadership position. Again, because it's an amateur sport, people are unafraid to insult you and bitch about you and all of that, and like that's actually like it sounds awful, and it is when you're in the midst of it, but it actually makes you a very, very good leader in the rest of your life, because when you are in a job and you're paid and your employees are paid, they tend to not say anything if something is wrong, because they don't want to jeopardize their job. In comparison, if you're doing something for fun and you're not having fun, you're going to be very vocal about it. And as someone in a leadership position, hearing everybody being vocal about how much fun they are not having, you have to get really good at making sure people are having fun good. And like improving. So like people like start bitching very quickly if they feel like they're not improving, for example. So you have to be very, very good at all of those things, and with a relatively low repercussions if you're bad at it. So like if you are bad at your job in a coach and as a boss, you can either screw over an entire company, at an extreme example, or you might just cause your employees to have like miserable careers and lives and all of that, and you probably won't even notice it. In comparison, if you screw up as a coach in Ultimate Frisbee, the worst case scenario is that they kick you off the team or make you tell you to step down as a coach, and it's not really that bad. So you get all of the good stuff meaning people complain and bitch about you all the time, but you get all the opportunity to improve without the consequences. And I think like that is like a formidable kind of combination when it comes to improving yourself as a person. So like those are all the lessons that I learned from Ultimate Frisbee, and I like felt that they make up like a huge part of who I am as a person. I realized that a lot of the teams nowadays don't approach Ultimate in that way. They don't really see Ultimate as a way to improve yourself, like no life lessons are taught in the process. And that was like upsetting to me to the core, because like that was like such a huge part of what Ultimate was for me. And so I wanted to start a team, a women's team, to kind of show people what I've learned from Frisbee. And so that invitation to coach came at a good time, and I decided to do it. I had like in mind a couple of things that I wanted first. So I wanted a co-coach who was so like I've been out of the scene for a while, so I wanted a co-coach who was more in the scene and more able to relate to people and stuff. And then I wanted a general manager and a few other things. And so we managed to put everything together, and we started the team.
Right. And so to sort of set the stage, right? How did you set up the team? There were tryouts, and then people came for the tryouts, and then what happened?
So people came for the tryouts. Not as many people came as I would have liked. Just because the whole thing was it wasn't well run. So basically, I think the association was happy to not even send a world's contingent at all. So I wanted the women's team to happen for the reasons I just mentioned. And so I kind of like pushed for the whole thing to happen. And then like the mixed team. So in Ultimate, there tends to be women's teams, men's teams, and mixed teams. So the mixed team also said, okay, we'll go ahead, we'll kind of piggyback on what you're doing. And then, now I'm going to veer off into politics for a tiny moment. But So like some people like said that you should join the mixed team because we can be more competitive there, and so a whole bunch of people joined the mixed team instead, even though they were just kind of piggybacking off of our campaign. And then so we kind of had the people who were interested in either like already knew about my approach, already knew about my coach's approach, or genuinely wanted to play women's. So they joined us, and we basically took everybody. We basically took everybody that signed up for the tryouts. I think we started with 26, 27 players to begin with.
And it was a mix of, mix of skill levels, right? Some of them were like very good, lots of experience, international experience, some with like zero international experience. Like, could they even throw?
Yeah, so they could throw, but not well. Couldn't do much. Like I think our least experienced player had been playing for 8 months. In comparison, our most experienced player would have been playing for more than a decade.
Right. And so this is the hand you've been dealt. So what was the training program that you created then, so to sort of deal with this?
One of the main things that I had to deal with was low self-esteem. I think this is quite common among Singaporeans to begin with. And then also, so traditionally in Singapore, mixed is like the main style of play. So most of the club teams in Singapore are mixed teams. And what happens then is that the women become second-class citizens on the field, because, just like genetically, we tend to run slower, jump less high, all of those things, and also probably less vocal. And so, they're told to do kind of like the follow-up duty kind of role on the field. And so you have a whole bunch of women who have spent their frisbee careers doing follow-up stuff. So they all don't think that they are good players. So which objectively speaking, like when you watch them play, they're actually like really, really talented, but they think that they are not good. And also like what I was mentioning earlier, like the level of talent was varied significantly. So the job that I had to do to begin with was kind of level everybody, make the team kind of as not consistent, but kind of at a more similar level, if not
at a base level of skill.
If not, it's very hard to play a team sport where you have a lot of people who can't do things. So that's kind of where we started with. So we split our training into pre-season, what was it? Pre-season, mid, in-season, peak season. The pre-season period was kind of, my goal for that was more like to teach a couple of key concepts and also to get people get everyone to know each other. So everyone was coming from different clubs with their own biases and their own training styles, and so I wanted people to get to know each other and just kind of get comfortable, and want to start to come more for training. So actually a lot of the things that I implemented, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place.
No. This
so
is good.
A lot of the things that I implemented were basically fixes from my previous Worlds experiences and my previous tournament experiences. So things that bugged me previously, I wanted to fix those things. So for example, one of my early Worlds experiences was people tend to not be that involved in the Worlds team as compared to their club team, because the club team will kind of guilt trip them a lot and tell them oh, we're friends, how can you abandon your friends for this stupid Worlds team that's only going to be around for a short while, and there's just kind of a lot of politics around that. So So I wasn't sure where it would go. So one of the early things that I did was we only trained fortnightly, and I kind of wanted to see like yeah. So I kind of wanted to see what people, like test the waters, get people used to it, and I was still like in the preseason phase. It would not have been surprising to me if like the whole thing would have been cancelled. I kind of fully expected, or like it would. There was always the possibility that like the team would fall apart, and so I never wanted to kind of push everyone too hard from the beginning, because I thought that might make it more likely that people fall apart quickly or like burn out quickly. So for me, like one of the indications that we were doing well was that people started complaining that we were training too little. So like, I'm a big fan of like paying attention to what people complain about rather than what people just do. So like what problems arise, those are the things that I pay attention to. So like when people start complaining, we're not competitive enough, we are not training enough, that indicates to me it's like, oh, people are like quite bought in, they want to train more. And like, so like a bad indication to me would be people not showing up for training, saying, oh, fortnightly is good, like being happy with like fortnightly training, like that's bad to me. So like, okay, like so once I had those indications and like people, like more and more people started complaining about that, then I was like, okay, this is a good indication, we can move from the preseason to the in-season. One of the other things I did in the preseason was kind of also remove two typical bad habits that people always do. So women always tend to be two bad habits that women tend to have in playing Ultimate, and that's lazy throws. So an example, so like a good throw would involve like a full body, like you would step out with your feet, there would be like strong core, you would go low and you would throw. A lazy throw is just kind of like, standing almost like upright and just like throwing with your hand.
And you throw to your dog.
I guess, I don't know. But yeah, like just like involving like this part of your body rather than your entire body.
Right.
So I...
and how do you fix that?
So I don't know if we want to talk about it now, but like basically this whole like
yes, let's talk about it now.
Okay.
So yes.
Okay, so I fixed it using this thing called like clicker training, or like for humans it's called tag teach.
For humans, so the origin of this is
the origin for this is for dolphins actually, and it's for training. Training animals to like, do tricks, do what do things that you want them to do. So one of the women on the team was actually she is a dog trainer, and so she suggested this like thing, like this clicker training, and she suggested that I try it. And the moment she said it, it was like, yes, like that sounds like an amazing idea. Like I can totally see how it fits in with my training approach, and we implemented it. And yeah, so sure enough, the bad habits that tend to plague players for years, like they just kind of disappeared overnight.
Just vanish.
Exactly.
Yeah. Could you explain how it works?
Okay, so I'm not going to explain it well because I'm not an expert in this, but basically there are a couple of like tenets of tag teach, TAG, tag. So the most important is that you have some kind of supplement that isn't your voice to, okay, this is not the most important, but it's one of the important things is so you don't want to use your voice to be like good job or yes, because traditionally those things mean so many more things other than a binary you did it, you didn't do it. So like, when you say good job, right, that term is so loaded. Like And like as a player, you'll be like, was she being sarcastic? Did she say good job? But the previous time she said great job, so was it not as good a job as the great job? You know, and like which part of it was a good job? Was it because I did this, or was it because I did that? Like, so there's so your voice and the words that you use are loaded because, you know, you already use those terms in daily communication. So you try to replace that with something like a clicker. In my case, I used an electronic whistle, and so the benefit of that is that it's very clear, and it's binary. Either there is a whistle or there isn't a whistle, or there is a click or there isn't a click. And what you try to do is establish the exact thing that will cause the click to happen. So you want to tell the players. Okay, so like officially, so this like in the tech teach pedagogy style, the phrase they use is the tag point is. So for example, you would say the tag point is hands to disc, right? Or like the tag point is straight arms. And so at the point at which they do it, you click. And so exactly, so it's very binary. So you can, so the player knows, I straightened my hands, I heard the click, yes, I did it. So there's no additional like politics involved in that. It's a neutral party saying you did or you didn't do it. So I guess I inadvertently kind of talked about the whole thing. And so like
what was the tech teach for this particular thing to stop lazy throws?
Okay. So mine was your hand when you are throwing the disc, your arm needs to go below your knees. Yeah. So in the motion, the throwing motion, your hand needs to go below your knees. So the moment their hand goes below their knees, whether or not it was a good throw, that's like not the point, right? The point is that they need to not throw a lazy throw. So the moment the hand goes below the knees, then I would beep, and then they would know that they've done it. So another important thing about tech teach is that you need to break things down into tiny observable and binary points, tag points. So if the outcome, if the objective is you want them to not throw a lazy throw, so then you cannot just say don't be lazy or don't throw a lazy throw, because like that doesn't really mean anything, right? Or it means like 100 different things to 100 different people. So instead of doing that, you want to break it down to something that's objective, observable, and binary. So like it's super binary. Either your hand went below your knee or it didn't, right? And so and it's like super clear also. Like you cannot say that your knee is actually your elbow. You cannot, like there's just like no two ways about it.
Right.
And then you also cannot argue something like, oh, but look, the throw went well, right? Which would be a common argument if you just gave an instruction like no lazy throws, because it'd be like, why not? I can throw a lazy throw if my throws are good, so I'm going to continue throwing lazy throws. And then it quickly devolves into this argument of like, when can you throw lazy throws? When should you not? And then it's just like a mess. Whereas if you say the tag point is throws below your knee, everyone's like, okay, cool, and then they immediately go and do it. And it's positively reinforcing. So meaning people are kind of seeking like forward, like they're seeking to do the right thing. So, they're, the moment the disc is in their hands, they are like this beneath, like arm beneath the knee. They're like trying to do it. As compared to negatively reinforcing, where you've told them something not to do. So if you say no lazy throws, they might be like, okay, I'm gonna, and then again it leaves it open to a lot of interpretations of what the good thing is. So I guess like that's kind of what tech teaches.
So with this technique, like, what were the results, and what would the results have been if you hadn't used tech teach?
So I can speak very easily about what the results would not have been, because basically people would just continue to not do it. there's the players who have been playing for a decade and still throw lazy throws. So the result is nobody would have listened, basically. They would have listened for a short while, maybe like one training session where I yell at people constantly to not throw a lazy throw. Maybe people would have stopped, and then after that, the next week they would have gone back to it straight away.
Right.
So then, like, the result of using this approach with Tech Teach is I completely eliminated all of it. Like, I think like after a couple of training sessions, like for the rest of the months after, like nobody threw lazy throws ever again.
Insane. Like I think one of my reactions when you first told me about this was that, it's incredibly compelling. Because if I'm a player and I'm running, I'm playing the game, and then like every time somebody throws, there's a beep. There's like, oh, the coach approves, right? And then I throw, and then there's no beep.
And you're like, what do I need to do?
I'm like, what? Why? Like, I hit you. Like the next time, I'm gonna make sure that I'm gonna throw below my knee. Like it is so compelling. It sort of triggers. It's below cognition, right? It's like at a very animal level.
Yeah, and it's like, because you've given it so clearly, and like. It's either beep or no beep. It's self-reinforcing. So like exactly what you said, right? Like you're like, okay, I'm gonna do it the next time. Like I didn't hear the beep. Where's the beep? I'm gonna like, I'll show you. Like show you how low I can go. That kind of thing. And you don't ever have to like shout at anybody. You don't have to like scold anybody. They're doing it for themselves.
But it's not just for that. Well, it kind of is for themselves. But I wonder if there's like a social element to it as well, right? Because like when you're playing in the entire team, right? The team can tell like, oh, this guy. I mean, he didn't throw properly because like there's no beep.
Yeah, that's true.
This positive reinforcement thing is really interesting. Like one of the things you said to me was it's very important to just reinforce positive behavior and not sort of scold or punish negative behavior. And I think one of the training interventions that you told me about that I was sort of amazed by was this whole attack the disc thing. Could you talk a bit about that and then sort of like segue into like why positive reinforcement? Why is it so important to just reinforce positive behavior instead of like punishing negative behavior?
Okay.
So attack the disc.
Okay, it's okay.
Sorry.
To be honest, I can't like super remember what I told you about the attack the disc thing, but basically, so attack the disc is like a common thing again that's like one of the two habits that women often do, and it's
women or not just like everybody.
Maybe guys do it too, but so it's kind of like a newbie thing where you are slightly afraid of the disc because it's coming at you, and you slow down instead of like going to the disc and like attacking it at full speed because you are scared that you drop it. So like a rule in frisbee is that if you drop a disc, it's a turnover. The other team gets it. So you don't want to drop the disc. So it's like a high risk thing to drop the disc, and so people would rather slow down and catch the disc carefully than speed up and aggressively catch the disc. But so like that's good at a low level, and I think like people are often told at a low level to slow down and like catch the disc carefully, which is why they do it. But at a high level, the assumption is everyone can catch the disc, and so you can't slow down because your defender is going to, and the defense will be a lot better at a high level. So you can't slow down. You have to run full speed and attack the disc. But because people are kind of conditioned with this whole I need to be careful to catch the disc thing, they always prioritize that instead of speeding up, and it's hard to kind of get them to get out of that kind of paradigm of top priority is to catch the disc. So what I try to do is push them like kind of completely reframe the paradigm. So instead of worrying, I like addressed the fear of not catching the disc head on by telling people, don't even worry about catching the disc. I want you to like run straight at the disc at full speed, and it's okay if it just like falls on the floor or something. And so like that kind of forces people to like so far away from the old paradigm that they are kind of forced to abandon it almost, and that kind of breaks open the opportunity to learn new things.
if I'm not mistaken, you also celebrate it. Like I said, if you, when you originally told me this, you were like, people say attack the disc and it's not very useful. What I tell them is like, if you run towards the disc and it hits you, even if you don't catch it, right, we will cheer for you. And that very...
So that's like a tag point thing. So you want to be clear about like what you're tagging, right? So the tag point is to run at the disc at full speed. So the tag point isn't to catch the disc. So when you run at the disc at full speed, regardless of whether you catch a disc or not, you get a beep. And so people are encouraged to do that. So like one of the things about like tag point is that like you want to break a like bigger objective into smaller parts and like be careful about the ordering of the parts. So if I had like done it wrongly, I would say the tag point is to catch the disc, and then after that try to get people to speed up. Whereas by reversing it, turning it on its head, and saying the tag point is to run at the disc at full speed, then they do that first. And likewise with the throwing one, right? Like the no lazy throw. So I beep at them going below the knee. I don't actually care what the disc, that's like what the throw actually looks like. Yeah.
Why is it so important to reinforce positive behavior instead of like, punishing negative? Like most Asians, we would be like, oh, negative, like must punish.
So the punishing behavior doesn't actually teach anything, because it tells someone what not to do. It doesn't tell them what to do. So you haven't actually given them new information. You've just told them, don't do this again. So not only does it like put it puts the learner in like a defensive state of mind, and when you are in a defensive state of mind, you cannot learn. You cannot go forward. So I wish I had like a good analogy for this, but okay, I know. So like imagine you're playing Super Mario, right? And you're scared of dying. And so you like crouch down and you stay in a thing. It's like, yes, correct, you haven't died, but you also haven't completed the level. The only way you can complete the level is to move forward. Right? And if you scold someone, and you've made them afraid of dying, then all they're going to do is crouch and like stay in that corner and not die, which again, is not wrong. It's correct that they indeed haven't died, but they haven't moved forward either. And when you're coaching, when you try and teach someone something new, they necessarily have to move forward. They can't just stay in the same like fetal position, because they haven't learned anything. So I would say that there's a time and place for making someone stay in position and not move, but then within the context of trying to teach someone something new, that's the worst thing that you can do. So you want to create an environment where they are constantly seeking, where they're constantly being like, like, should I do this? Should I do that? What should I do? What should I do? Like, that's kind of the environment that you want to create, like this like forward motion environment. And so doing everything you can to create this forward motion environment, including positive reinforcement, is really, really important. And hence like, just like you never want to do negative stuff. So okay, a good example, I was just reading about, I was reading the Tech Teach book. So like kids at recess time, like little kids, they're all meant to stand in a line before recess, and then stand up straight, and then they all go for recess. But then the problem is because they're all young kids, right? So they're like pushing, fidgeting, playing, and all of that. So the tendency is like for a teacher to say, stop fidgeting, stop moving, stop doing this, stop doing that. And so a kid will be like, okay, you've told me to stop pulling the hair, so now I will poke my friend's back. Or you've told me to like stop, stop pulling the t-shirt, so I'm going to tickle them instead. And it's like, and then the teacher scolds you, you're like, yeah, but I've stopped doing the thing that you've told me to do. And so it's like not actually helpful to give instructions like that. So instead, what the book said is, you say the tag point is hands on hips. So all the kids now put their hands on hips. And so that's a positive thing, right? And it's like you actually cannot poke and tickle and pull and all of that if your hands are on your hips. And it's a very clear instruction. directed the attention to this like very, very specific thing that you want them to do, and they all now want to do it because they get to hear a beep when they do it. It's like, oh, you know what, I've like my hands are first, you know, I like put my hands on my hips first, and then immediately everyone's like perfectly behaved, and then they can all go off to recess as like a perfect line of like well-behaved kids. So it's learning about like which,
wow.
yeah, right, it's amazing, right? Like, so learning about like what kinds of tech points to use is super important.
Right. And so like this book is by Karen Pryor?
This particular book was
Is it?
not, but I've also read like Karen Pryor's book as well.
Right. So I'm going to link to both in the show notes, listeners, if you're listening. I think what's an interesting sort of segue here is when we met earlier, you told me like how your fundamental training philosophy is you want to create this forward motion of searching. I'm probably messing up like the exact words you used, but I don't believe I fully understood it then. And I want to sort of like hear about like this is the underpinning of your entire training approach, right? Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So my personal website is leslie.pizza, and the title of that site is Failing Forward. And it's, again, like with this like forward motion, how do I explain it? Like, I guess it is kind of what I just said about like the Super Mario game, like trying at all costs to avoid someone being scared to figure something out, or trying to avoid people from just doing smaller and smaller like optimizations, when those optimizations, yes, they might be incrementally better for like a specific thing, but like look at how much more you have to learn and how much more opportunity there is. And I think like a lot of Singaporeans tend to be very optimisy, like they want to stay in their lane, and do the thing that they've been told, and like try to incrementally do it better, rather than like be curious about life and like be curious about what's out there and search and be okay with the fact that it's super messy and you have lots of unknown and all of that. And I think like you can learn so much faster and in a more happy and like curious and playful way if you if there's an environment of forward motion, of seeking, of positive reinforcement, and like where like failure is not necessarily acceptable, but it's embraced, like it's understood as like failure is inevitable. And yeah, so like when you create that kind of environment and people experience it for the first time, it can be life-changing, and it really teaches you how to learn for yourself also. Yeah, and I guess like that's kind of the environment that I wanted to create for people on the team.
Could you give like an example of like, apart from like the whole tech teach thing, which is sort of like in line with this, but like what is another example of how do you create this forward motion?
Okay, so another example is so in frisbee, like it's typical to play mini games. So like like for example, a typical game would be a game to 21 or 14 or 17, something like that. And so that can take an hour and a half, and then you wouldn't have enough time to explain things or like do specific things. And so you can create instead a game to 3, and then like the objective for that game to 3 is offense always starts with the disc, or whatever it is that you want to do. so like that's kind of like
game to 3 is
sorry,
game to 3
3
wins.
points. Yeah, so score 3 points.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, got it.
Sorry,
got
I
it.
should have explained that better.
No worries.
And
then,
so, but there's like lots and lots of different ways and like permutations to play with this concept. Negative one, the one that like results in the Mario crouching and like not moving, would be any drop disc results in 100 push-ups, for example, and so that makes people scared to do new things, right? Their goal is to not fuck up, and so you play like too conservatively. You can't do new things, you can't learn. You're just trying to not fuck up. A way to kind of do the forward motion thing is like I would say like throw 100 passes. So the game is to throw 100 passes, and turnovers don't matter. So if you turn over, you just pick up the disc and continue. And then you have to give like a instruction or a tag point, like 100 passes, and then I would pair that with like the tag point of throw beneath your arm needs to go below your knee. And then so like people get a lot of reps because it's 100 passes for the entire team. So you have a lot of reps, a lot of like throw beneath the knee, and no fear of fucking up. So people can go and do it and like try. It's like fine to try and like not hear the beep, right? And then all it matters is you try to get the disc again and then like do it again and then hear the beep next time. So
this is like almost a meta level above the. It's like the approach itself is positive, and then the tech teach point is also positive.
Yeah, exactly. So like you want to like create like a environment where everything is kind of in sync with this whole like positive forward motion seeking kind of thing.
I think it's a very common novice coaching mistake to get frustrated and then like call out mistakes and be very angry about the mistakes. Whereas your approach is very much like, no, like I'm going to look for like positive behaviors that will make you more effective, and then I will run the program so that you get to those positive behaviors. It's quite profound.
Okay, so like to be clear, that there's also a time and place for the negative stuff. So if you recall, we had the pre-season, then we had the in-season, and then the peak season. So my plan was for the peak season to be the time where you'd be like, oh yeah, 1 turnover equals 100 push-ups kind of thing, because like at that point you get to you've like learnt all the things you want to learn, and now the time is for optimizing. So like now's the time where you can't fuck up anymore, because like you're meant to already know what you need to know. And like at some point you do have to get there, because like if you're playing a competitive sport, there are actual consequences, right? When you throw a disc away, you lose the game. So you also want to mimic that. It's just that you need to be very careful about what you're teaching and how, and like pairing the teaching methods to the thing that you're trying to teach. So like for me, what I was trying to do is slowly increase the pressure. So kind of like the boiling a frog in a pot thing. So at the start, like training is only every two weeks, and it's not very intense. People complained about it, and then as we kind of moved into the peak season, then we got to a point where training was very, very intense, and the standards were a lot higher, and we did do things like every turnover equals and then like people were doing like an insane amount of burpees and stuff like that at the end of each training. And like I think like I guess like that's kind of the ideal. But I also wanted to talk a bit more about like the positive reinforcement stuff.
Sure, go.
So the other thing that I did there was for me to take a step back as a coach. So oftentimes coaches want to assert their dominance to show how smart they are or how experienced they are and why players should listen to them. For me, I actively tried to act dumb and take myself away from the conversation so that they would have to come up with ideas, and I wanted to give people the feeling of the safety net was taken away from them, and it was up to them to figure things out for themselves. And again, like I did that because going back to the what I said like super early on about frisbee being this like great place where you can fail and the consequences are not that big, and so but then at the same time you can try lots of cool stuff. And have quite a lot of responsibility. So I wanted to give people that experience, because like it's hard to have that experience at work, right? Like your employer is really only going to promote you when they are confident that you can already, be a manager or be a boss or whatever. Because the consequences there are quite big if you get promoted into a position that you where you sink. In contrast, like in frisbee, like sure, I can promote you to whatever it is that you want, and if you fail, then the worst case scenario is that we have a crappy tournament and it's not that big a deal. Nobody, no lives are gonna be screwed over by that. And so I was constantly trying to promote people who didn't feel like they were ready. So I made like a whole bunch of people line captains. So each line has sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, so each line has 8 to 9 people, and I would like put people as captains, and then we had like team captains as well who had never been team captains before, and everybody was like melting down like left, right and center. They were all like, I don't know how to be a line captain, I don't know how to be a captain, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that, and I was like, it's fine. What's the problem here? Like I would kind of let them melt down. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I kind of like let them melt down and like hate me, and like they were like complain constantly that there was a lack of guidance. And as far as I was concerned, that's a good problem to have, right? Because like I wanted to give people that feeling of no safety net, and for people to kind of come through at the other side of it, learning how to do these things themselves. So I think like some people really didn't like it, but I was okay with that, because again, like what's the worst that could happen, right? Like we would just, all just have a less fun tournament. And the result of which, when they do get promoted or they become a manager for the first time, they're like, oh, I've experienced this like fucked up no safety net position before when I was a line captain at this like horrible team that I really hated being a part of. But like to me, that was like a great trade-off. And again, that like gives them this like positive forward motion of like, oh shit, how do I become a captain? How do I learn this stuff? There's no one telling me how to do it. I better figure it out for myself. And so like as a result, there were a lot of line captains who became really, really good friends, because they were like talking amongst themselves all the time because they had no idea what was going on. I wasn't giving them direction. So they had to figure it out. And yeah, so like for me, that was a bit evil, but it was fun.
I mean, so your approach is very much, you really did not care that much about the results of the tournament, as long as they got a huge amount of like life lessons out of that. Am I getting that right?
Yes. Okay. Yes and no. So if you like a good life lesson is learning how to win, and like playing at a high level of intensity where the pressure is really high and winning. So like winning does matter, and I also would love to teach them that, but it's like kind of what you can teach at the time. So at the time of in season, it's like these are the things that are acceptable, and then like as we go to peak season, then like sure, I would have to tighten up a bunch of things, but until we get to that point, I'm okay for like everyone to feel like they're floundering.
I think that's something useful there. I don't think many people in businesses, especially with like training, regiments in businesses, right? They won't think in terms of like seasons. Whereas this is very common in professional sports. I was a competitive judo player, but even then we didn't really have seasons. But then when I listened to like one of the more international or national judo serious good international judo coaches, they always talk about like how we divide their training system into like seasons. And I do wonder, maybe one of the benefits of that is that you can be very clear with yourself. Okay, it's okay to fail and mess up and do experiments in the earlier seasons, and then we only go into optimization and tighten mode at the very last bit.
Yeah. And so like some of the cool things as a result was, so that like idea that like if you bred an animal in captivity, then you bring the cage out, you put them in the middle of the jungle, and you open the cage. They like just stay in the cage because all they've known their entire life is the cage. So like there was a bit of that going on the team as well. Like, you know, on day one when they joined my team, they've only ever known captivity. Like they've only ever known a coaching environment where like people are really strict and like always telling them what not to do and like how to not fuck up. So when I open the door for them and like tell them like, actually, you know, on my team you can do almost anything you want, everyone just stays in the cage, and they pretty much stayed in the cage for like the first 5 months, and it was only towards the end, as we were reaching the peak season and reaching the height of COVID, that people started to kind of get out of the cage, realize that, you know, they could leave the cage, and it was really cool. So one of like the problems that people started talking about was like, oh, there's a lot of talking during training, right? We're talking too much. It's a waste of time. But like that to me is an indication, it's like a great symptom of the fact that everyone's starting to leave the cage. They're realizing we can discuss amongst ourselves. We don't have to wait for the coach to tell us exactly what to do. Let's like troubleshoot ourselves. Let's figure things out. So, you know, the thing that people complain about then was like, too much talking during training. Everyone is like, you know, there's like 100 people, 100 conversations going on. But to me, it's like, you know, that to me shows like the success, the sign that everyone has left the cage, and everyone's starting to figure stuff out for themselves. And so I was like really, really proud and happy about that, actually.
To sort of reorient a little bit to another aspect of your training, which I found like quite remarkable. You talk to me a little about finding desirable problems versus undesirable problems. I don't know if I'm phrasing it right. Like in my memory, you're like good problem to have, right? Versus bad problem to have, right? Although like good and bad is like very like sort of, you know, they're words with many meanings. So maybe desirable and undesirable is better. Could you talk a bit about that though?
So I guess it's kind of similar to what I just talked about. Like a desirable problem to me is one where it's a problem in the direction of your goal. So there's like progress. So what I mean by that is, an undesirable problem would be if people are, still not talking amongst themselves, waiting for instructions, and complaining that I wasn't giving enough instructions. So that's an undesirable problem. A desirable problem is when people are now complaining that there's too much conversation going on. People are talking amongst themselves too much, because that shows that progression. It shows that like people have now gone out of their cage. There will always, I guess the thing that people don't really think about or appreciate is that there's always going to be problems. There will never not be problems. You're not going to have a perfect team. You're not going to have a perfect company. People are never going to be like so fulfilled in their jobs that they will just come to their jobs every day, like feel blessed and then leave at night, right? Like that just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So there will always be problems. So you want to be very careful about what kind of problems you propagate, and you want to use the problems. You want to kind of use the problems as like a leading indicator for the health of your company or the health of your team. So if a problem is persistent, that's an undesirable problem, because it indicates that you or your team or your company is not progressing. Broadly speaking, or generally speaking, if it's a new problem, it's better than an old problem, but obviously some new problems are also bad. But so like another problem, like if we take it back a bit in the pre-season, people, before really starting training, people complained a lot about the lack of quality on our team. Like we had really inexperienced players. There was a big gap in experience and skill. So that's like the benchmark, right? But then after a while, people stopped complaining about that, and then they started complaining about they started complaining about me. They started complaining that I wasn't giving them enough guidance, and they would say things like, "Sure," like they would dismissively say things like, "Sure, so and so has now gotten a lot better, but the team hasn't improved." Not realizing that the fact that it's a new problem and the fact that they can now dismissively say that these weaker players were now a lot stronger and we don't even have to worry about these things anymore. Like, they don't realize that, that's a great thing, right? The fact that they can now like move on to new problems, like they don't realize that that's amazing.
Yeah.
So like watching out for like what people are complaining about is really, really good. So another favorite example of mine is during COVID, the transition of a lot of companies from in person to remote. So a bad problem would be an increase in meetings. So people would be like, I want a Zoom account, or my calendar is really full now, things like that. So that would be a bad problem because that's the same kind of problems that you have in person. Only you've brought it online, right? So instead of like, hey, can we grab a coffee now? You have to like book a calendar event and have your meeting then. So that's a bad problem. A good problem is now people are saying things like, you've told me to use Notion. I hate Notion. I've heard of Coda. I want to use Coda instead. You told me to use Jira. I hate Jira. I've heard about this thing called Linear. I want to use Linear instead. Hey, everyone's writing documentation now, but it's like so fucking messy and like certain people can't write well, so I hate reading their documentation. Those are good problems to have because that indicates that people are moving towards the remote async style of working. So like the problems they have are remote problems, so it's that progression of problems. So if you see those problems, yes, they are still problems because all companies, all things, everything has new problems that you will face, but you want to make sure that the problems are desirable in the direction of where your company is headed.
I think that's that is a very good usable sort of. People always talk about like how everything has problems and you just have to like pick your poison, right? Or the recent conversation we had this morning about like how Ben Horowitz was saying that in a large company, the company's always broken in some horrible way and it's your fault and you can't do anything about it. And I think this is like one very sort of usable frame, I think, as entrepreneurs or like people in companies to use it. But I also want to bring an instantiation of this philosophy that you actually pointed out to me, I guess it was months ago at this point, where you sort of said like one example of this, although this is a very small example and the philosophy is more important than the example, so I do want to make that clear to listeners. But the example you gave me was, in Ultimate, one problem that a lot of players have is if they're novices or intermediate level players, they have difficulty deciding who to throw to. I can't remember that. Okay, so the exact scenario is something like they're about to throw and something they were expecting, like this person has to be in that point, doesn't happen, and then now they can't decide. And in Ultimate, you have like a 10-second time span, right, where like the defender comes to you and then starts counting down, which is another example of the self-governance aspect of Ultimate, which I found mind-blowing. Like 10, 9, 8, 7, and if it hits 1, right, then the turnover happens. You have to hand the disc over to the other team, right?
Yeah.
And so like
it's the other way around, but yeah.
Oh, it's the other way
I
around.
think you start from 1. So
you start from 1, 2, oh my goodness, and then when it hits 10, then and people panic, right? Like, especially if they're not experienced players, they're like, oh my god, it's nearly 10, let me just make a stupid throw. And how, like you said that you had a way of solving this, which was like, oh, you're replacing this bad problem with a better problem. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. So the bad habit is that you tend to either get tunnel vision. So there's like a thing that you like your cutter. So cutter is like the receiver person. So you expect your receiver to run in a certain way, and either their timing is off, so they're a bit slow, they're not there yet, and then you wait for them because you have 10 seconds, which can feel like quite a long time. So you wait for them for too long, and then now the timing is like even more weird, and then after, when it's like stall count 7 or 8 or something, you turn and try to do some other pass, look for your second option, but often that's like too late. And the flip side, from the receiver's point of view, because they have 10 seconds, they might start at 0 or 2 or 3 even, start running, which is again too late. So I removed all of those problems by just artificially and arbitrarily saying that for our team, our stall count is always 6. So whether we are at training or even at games, so if we are playing against another team, they might stall us to 10, but like in our minds, the stall is 6, and so we have to get it off by 6. And that removes all of those problems immediately. So they don't even have the opportunity to get those bad habits. So typically, traditionally, you would look for your second option at stall count 6. For us, you would have to look for your second option at stall count 2, because it takes about 4 seconds for the second option to develop. So what that means is your first option has to start at like -2 or -3 in order to be a viable option at 0, because you have 0 and then you have about 2 seconds to kind of identify, lock on, and throw. And then again, your second option has to kind of start being in position at stall count 1 or 2, so that at stall count 2 they are ready to initiate the second option. So it creates like so many good things immediately. So the flow of the game is significantly faster, which is very, very helpful, because the faster the disc is changing hands, the more confusing it is for the defense, because they need to like pay attention more, which is always tricky. It improves the thrower, because the thrower has to, they have to be like very, very focused to either throw that disc at stall count 0, 1 or 2, or like move immediately, figure out what's your second option, get that off, and most importantly, it improves the skills of the cutter, because now you don't have the 10 seconds to fuck around anymore. So your timing has to be really, really on point. And often like cutters have really lazy timing, I think, because of this 10-second rule. I used to play netball where the stall count is 3 seconds. So I never understood like why you needed 10 seconds anyway, because in netball, everyone, the whole game is played with 3 seconds. So clearly it can be done. So like it forces people to have better timing, make smarter decisions, be on point at a better time, and yeah.
So you're replacing one set of like, so no. Like I think if I was a coach, right, in your shoes, I would not have thought of this immediately. I would have, how do I train the ability to like build a second decision, build 2 plans at the same time, like not be so like picky or tunnel vision. How do I train you cognitively, which is a really difficult
that's what everyone normally
problem.
Does. Yeah,
right.
Yes.
Like I would like think about like, how is there some exercise I can do to sort of like train everybody to be in this mind state, and not everybody can do it. Some people naturally can, some people cannot. All these are really difficult training problems, and you're like, no, screw that. Screw that. I'm just going to replace all those training problems and avoid it completely by replacing it with this, and then I have a new set of problems that are sort of like better and easier to train for. Easier because like you now have the problem of like you need to run faster, but then I think
it's not run faster. The timing has to be better.
Yes, so there's no like white space. There's no like gaps in between run time or decision time, right? And this is harder, but also easier to train for, and it's a better problem to have for your overall game. And I was so mind blown by this. I was like, are there things in my judo game where I could like completely avoid if I train some other thing? It's
So I think actually for me, that story, the takeaway for me there is more a lesson about constraints, applying the right constraints to solve, to end up at the solution that you want. So what I mean by that is I try not to. So remember how you were saying like, we don't want to have the tunnel vision, so you like try to like, teach people this like cognitive thing, and like it's very deliberate, and all of this thing, right? So like when you tell people these things, and you know, to take a page from your book about your hatred of deliberate learning, right? Like if you tell people to explicitly about this kind of stuff, then like they focus on it, and they're not actually trying to solve the problem. They are just like trying to not do tunnel vision. So you don't want to tell them what not to do. What you want to do is just kind of create the necessary constraint so that they can problem solve around the constraint to get to a solution that you want. So how do I explain? Okay, so in advertising, for example, so my background is in advertising, and you know, people famously talk about how like constraints make a better campaign, like the right constraints. So you know, because we were doing this thing and we only had $5,000, we couldn't, you know, do this crazy thing. So we had to come up with a better idea, and then like because of that constraint, that allowed us to create this like amazing idea that ended up really helping the company market themselves well. And I think the same thing applies here. So like you don't necessarily want to spoon feed and tell people exactly what to do and or what not to do and all that things. You just want to create the constraint and then kind of let them problem solve themselves and figure things out themselves, and then they're going to arrive at the solution that you want, but they will have felt like they arrived at it themselves, and they will have the benefit of that problem solving, gone through that problem solving thing themselves, gone through that figuring things out themselves, because you know, it's a blank space, like beyond aside from that constraint, you know, that fence that you've placed, like the rest of it is just a green field, right? They can do whatever they want inside that constraint. And yeah, so I like really like setting up drills or setting up things in this way. So it's like, you know, they can't really fail because you've set up a good constraint, and then they figure things out themselves, they learn more deeply. Yeah.
Right. So I'm gonna I think there's 3 more questions. We're gonna go slightly over time, so don't worry about it. But I want to ask another aspect of your training, which you've talked about. You know, is like you do drills and you do simulations and you do nothing in between. And I found that quite interesting. Could you talk a bit about that?
So my Japanese friend, who he lived in Singapore for a while, he was a teammate of ours, and he sometimes can talk a bit about how like he doesn't like the Japanese style of rigidly doing drills. So Japanese drills look very beautiful. They're like very, very intricate, and you see them running and it looks like clockwork, and it's amazing. It's very, very beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily translate into the game. So for ultimate players who might be listening to this, a good example of this is the mushroom drill. So mushroom drill is this like very, very popular ultimate game. It's often used as a warm-up in tournaments. It's like very nice, you know, like the movement, the flow is very nice and all that, but it's like completely not related to gameplay or game movement at all. And people use it all the time. And yeah, so there's like not much point in teaching drills where the end goal of the drill ends up inevitably being how nice can it look for the drill, like you know, how like clockwork nice can it look. There's not much point in that. So what I try to do is teach the very basic skill. So I'll like kind of like a snapshot of a game. There's this like thing or like bad habit or sequence that I want to teach, so we'll drill that a lot, and then we don't try to add anything beyond that. So there's always a temptation of, okay, we've captured this snapshot, then we're gonna like string a few more snapshots together, and then it like looks more and more like a game. But I find that always leads to too much things going on. And it always sounds nice in the head, but then once you actually do it, players get confused very quickly. So I try to just keep it as that snapshot, and then we move immediately to like the mini games, which is like that 100 passes, turnovers don't matter kind of thing that I mentioned. And so a good example would be like we would do a snapshot where your goal is to throw off, so a specific throw, like to throw off the sideline with that low release throw beneath the knee thing. So we do that a whole bunch of times, and then after that we move to the game where your goal is to do that low release. And so it's you get like the fluidity of the game, so they get that feeling of like trying to do the skill in the game, and then you get that, and you don't get anything in between.
Yeah, I see this in other sports as well, and I'm sort of like reflecting, like my big thing, my big hatred actually is like traditional Japanese judo training techniques. Not to speak too badly of Japanese pedagogy. It just so happens that judo started in Japan and it's 100 years old, and I'm always incredibly irritated by the whole in judo, at least, like these drills that are basically, it's called uchikomi, but like uchikomi is very often like not, it's basically you do the motion without actually doing the throw, so you stop right before the throw. And I know a coach in KL, right, who he reminds, or like rather talking to you and him, like there are lots of similarities between the way that both of you approach pedagogical development. He's very irritated by that because he's like, if you keep training 100 times or 1,000 times, which in a normal, like as an athlete, like 1,000 times in a week is like very little. It trains your muscle memory for not the full motion of the throw, and you know you just stop right before you finally finish the execution, and this can actually trip you up, right? So you should practice the full motion of the throw, and that's why in Europe they have these incredibly fluffy and large crash pads that are very, so that you can actually throw the person without harming the other person, right? Whereas in Japanese dojos they usually are not that many crash pads, and so this is necessary because otherwise you get thrown 100 times, you'll be very sore. Anyway, like 100%, I think I now wonder, you know, in business or marketing or whatever, what the equivalent of this is, where you've got like, you know, basic skills, and then you've got simulations of like real world use, but then nothing in between, because like you say, it's really hard to sort of do transfer of skill from training to I don't know if it's possible at all in career situations, but I've been thinking about this ever since you told me about this approach.
I'm not sure. I would say maybe, and okay, I'm not a developer, but I've heard like companies who on day one let people, what's the term called? Like put something into
production, ship.
Yeah, production.
Push
Yes,
to production. Yeah.
Like on day one. So I feel like that would be a similar approach. So you know, obviously you wouldn't let them do like something massive, but like. That feeling of pushing something to production on day one like really sets the tone for everything. Yeah. I think there's something there as well. I wonder what the marketing version of this, like from day one you push out an ad of like a $5 budget. Yeah, maybe, but I don't know about that.
Right.
Write a blog post that like gets published on day one, maybe.
That might be doable. Yeah, I think so. Could you like say like what is a good drill in your view? Like what properties should it have?
This is tough. I think a good drill.
Or maybe I should reverse the question and ask my favorite question, right? What would a novice get wrong when they're coming up with a drill?
When they're coming up with a drill.
When they're picking a drill.
So I mean, I guess the novice will always pick the one that looks beautiful, like the routine, you know, the clockwork routine one. Almost all novices pick that because it really looks very beautiful when it's executed well. I think but I don't think that necessarily tells you what is a good drill. That just tells you what's a bad drill. I think a good drill might be one that has a very specific point to teach, like it teaches something super specific, so you know, like a very very specific throw, so not a drill that doesn't try to combine too many things, and also so very specific, doesn't try to combine too many things, and also a lot of room, like well constrained. I would say. So one of my favorite drills is a super simple drill. It almost doesn't seem like a drill actually. It's 100 throws in, I don't know, I can't remember the timing now, but like, let's just say 1 minute, for example. Or 3 minutes, I think the timing was, something like that. But anyway, so 100 throws in 3 minutes. And the constraint is the 100 throws in 3 minutes, right? And because you set that constraint, people have to throw very accurately and very fast. If you throw like slow throws, which go all over the place, you can't actually hit the 100 throws because you're spending too much of your time, like going, all over the place trying to pick up the disc, wasting time. And so it's a very simple drill. People don't feel like you've told them too many things. The drill is very, it's 100 throws in 3 minutes. There's nothing to argue about. There's nothing to clarify. But the end result is that people end up having very crisp throws, very accurate throws, and very hard, straight, throws, which is what you want. But you've never told them that, right? You've never told them, you never at once said, I want you to throw hard, I want you to throw straight, I want you to throw crispy, because like, what do these things even mean? And instead, all you've done is like set this very, very simple constraint. Everybody just goes and executes it. And over time, everyone just like ends up being really good throwers, and they can't tell you why. And, and that's great. So that's like kind of my ideal drill.
Yeah, this almost sounds like the Leah DiBello thing, where like she sets the constraint for the business, and then like everybody just figures out like lean manufacturing because like it's the constraints force it on them.
Yeah, but like if you try to explain lean manufacturing, if you try to tell them, like this is what we're going to do, there's this like Japanese thing, all this history, it's amazing. Like people would just like, their brains would melt, right?
Yeah.
So like you don't want to do that. You just want to set the constraint and then kind of leave it alone and let people do it. So the constraint is the beauty of it, and it's like really, 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 really hard to pick the right constraint. I think that would be like the number one difficulty, I would say.
How do you know then? Or like just trial and error?
Trial and error. You kind of get like, it's what do you call it? Taste. You get a taste for it.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's definitely a lot of like trial and error and learning along the way.
Yeah, I've noticed this when I sort of like brainstorming a exercise with you, just out of fun, right? You could immediately say like, no, this doesn't feel right. This training that you've suggested probably won't work. And I'm like, okay, there's some taste going on here that I don't know. I guess to sort of like close out this discussion, let's get back to the thing that you referred to very early on in this, this conversation, where you said like playing to play versus playing to win. Or the actual phrase that you used that I opened up the piece on the blog was, you said that make sure that you're playing the actual game, not some game you've made up for yourself. And let's talk about that for a bit, because I think that was obviously I wrote a whole blog post about it, so it's been quite influential to me. And I think what you've done is you've put words around something that I've observed that I think anybody who has been obsessed with games or obsessed with sport would think about. So yeah, how do you came up with that, or what was the history there?
To be fair, I came up with it with my friend Kwa Liang. We were reading this book. I can't remember the book. I think it's like How to Be Rich or something like that. And this guy talks about it a lot. And so I feel like he also put the words to the concept. But
I have to read that book.
Yeah, it's a very fun book.
Yeah, it's been recommended to me a few times.
So it's definitely read it. It's a quick read, fun read. I guess like, so for when it comes to frisbee, okay, so let's talk about, for example, that like really nice Japanese throw, right? The throw itself is really beautiful, and it serves a very clear purpose. And so a lot of people want to do it not because it serves the purpose, but because it looks very cool, looks very beautiful. And so they spend years trying to develop this stupid throw, which is very hard to throw. I can't throw it. Or I definitely cannot throw it in a game. Maybe I will like try to throw it at training or something when I'm like mucking around, but I wouldn't trust myself to throw it at a high level game. And it takes, like I said, it takes years to develop it so that you can trustworthily, successfully throw it at a high level game. And because it looks so beautiful, and because it's like a very famous, prominent throw, a lot of people try to develop it, and sometimes it might not be necessary, right? So like if you're an American and you already have the biggest, fastest receiver, you don't need to throw. You can just kind of like close eyes do some, throw some crappy throw, and like your big bad receiver will like just own everybody and like go get the disc. But if you were, if you wanted to play some game that you've made up for yourself, then you might, spend the 2 or 3 years it would take to develop that throw. Rather than play the game as it is, like play the actual game, which would be, I have the best receiver, in the world, for example. I'm just going to throw crazy shit at him or her and let them go and get it. And it doesn't matter how crappy my throw is because this person is really good. So if you're playing to play beautifully rather than to fully exploit your advantages, then I would say you're playing some game that you've made up for yourself. But having said that, and like you and I have discussed this extensively also, like it tends to not be like the extremes, right? Nobody really just plays the game specifically and like exploits every single advantage perfectly. People tend to be in the middle. And we tend, there's lots of like, I want to play a certain way, and like play a certain style that doesn't necessarily have an impact on winning or losing, but it's kind of my philosophy. And I think like kind of, I don't know if I've like ended up on anywhere, but for now, I mean, I think it's fine. Like I'm also like that. I definitely have a philosophy, like what we were talking about, the life lessons thing. I don't think teaching life lessons has any impact on how well you, or whether you win or lose. If anything, it's probably better to be a bit of an asshole and, have poor spirit and bad sportsmanship because, it's kind of unregulated. So for me, like, I actually kind of probably err more towards the scrub side, the playing a game that you've made up for yourself. Yeah,
instead of playing to win.
Yeah.
Well, not to sort of speak against that. I think it fit what focusing on life goals fit what you told me about the constraints you were under, because you sort of said to me that like there was no way you could have won the world championships given the setup, given the head cuts you were dealt, right? You were very pragmatic or realistic with like what your goals were, which were, I don't know what it was, like maybe like position number 7 or something like that, like some position, right? That wasn't the winning the world championships. And within that sort of like framework, if you're sort of realistic, like we're not going to be number 1 because like it's last minute, it makes sense to be like, okay, so this is just the first try. Maybe we will get better at the next world championships, right? Then we will focus on winning. And so like since this is the constraints, then it makes sense to sort of teach life lessons because that's ultimately more valuable. Like I think about this quite a bit with debate. So I was, apart from like a very competitive judo player, I was competitive in debate as well. But then like I sort of said to a friend, because he went on to win championships at university level and I stopped at university level, right? I just did high school. I said, I think I learned enough useful skills from debate that will help me in real life, and then everything apart from that is like just how to win. And I don't think the how to win bits are useful to real life, and I think that's something there as well. Yeah.
I mean, I think yes and no. So like the how to win parts are useful because there's a level of sustained intensity that you need to bring
that's true.
To the table if you want to win, especially when it's at a highly competitive arena. And your ability to kind of like like walk that line for a long time without cracking, I think is invaluable, and you can definitely bring that to the way that you approach work and all that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that makes this discussion sort of like difficult, right, which we've talked about as well, is there are like aesthetic choices and ethical choices as well in the real world. So like I think in my blog post I and this is sort of like a reflection that fell out of our discussions, was sometimes you want to play the more difficult game because it's better for the world to play the more difficult game. And I had another friend who sort of said that like if you treat life as a game, then an example would be he's an academic, And some people play the publishing game because that's the way you get tenure. It's the sheer number of papers you publish, right? And he said that some people do is they find one discovery and then they like squeeze like 5 papers out of it, which does nothing for the world, right? But it's they say that, oh, this is the rules of the game, this is how I'm going to get tenure. But actually no, this is not how science is supposed to be done. Which is why I think like there's that's the beauty of the self-governance thing, like when you kind of propagate this idea of protecting the commons, like people want to do it, rather than try to what you said, like squeeze every ounce of thing because of this like very arbitrary rule of that's the way you get tenure. Of course, in business, it's the sad thing is that it's not sad. It's just the reality of things, right? Like some people, if they push a strategy, then they have then you have no choice but to deal with the fact they're dealing with this strategy. There's no like referee in the world of business. You just have to deal with it. Yeah. All right. I guess we're at time. Maybe we'll close it out to sort of like talk a bit about this thing that you do and like to sort of point people towards newsletter glue. So to sort of close out this conversation is pretty much about pedagogy, but I want to sort of like let people know as well that of this thing that you're doing, and then we'll end the conversation on that note. So Lesley, what is newsletter glue?
Newsletter glue is a WordPress plugin. It lets you write newsletters like you write a blog post, so kind of similar to Substack, like you're writing in a thing. It doesn't feel like you're writing in MailChimp or MailerLite or ConvertKit. And the upside to that is WordPress. The WordPress blog editor is really, really powerful, and it's a much better writing experience, and it gives you get like all the advantages of a blog for your newsletter. So like newsletters tend to be quite siloed. They appear in someone's mailbox, and that's about it. You can't really do much else with it. Whereas if you approach newsletter writing like you would a blog, you get a nice archive, and it's a public archive. It's online. Everything is a specific link, so you can share the links easier for every single issue. We also have like a show height feature thing. So because you're publishing things online and in your inbox, you can choose what things go online, what things go in your inbox, and so you can have like a special discount code or something, or a special message to your readers if you subscribe, and it just kind of makes the newsletter experience both for yourself and for your subscribers more full, more well-rounded. You can even like restrict the content. You can pair us with a different plugin, and you can restrict the content online. So there's a whole bunch of things that kind of open up to you once you approach your newsletter as a publication or as a blog, as compared to if you're just thinking of it as a newsletter. So we enable all of those things.
Right. And people who use newsletter glue, do they graduate from Substack to something like newsletter glue? Or like what's the context there? So that's quite a common flow. People kind of run up against the limitations of Substack. Either it's a design limitation or like a payment. They want like a specific membership style or something which Substack doesn't allow. Or they want to own things, because if not, it's going to be commonculk.substack.com, and they want to kind of own the thing a bit better. Then they move to WordPress, where they can control everything. They own their content. They're not worried about the changes of the Substack platform. So that happens often. And then also people who have already their businesses on WordPress. So they might be a real estate agent, or a professional blogger, or an agency, and they already work every day in WordPress, either on WordPress with the real estate, or they build WordPress sites for the clients, and so they're already very familiar with WordPress.
and they don't want to be kind of context switching between like WordPress and MailChimp or WordPress and ConvertKit, and they've already like the way they set things up in WordPress. So we allow them to kind of continue doing everything in WordPress, and because of the nature of WordPress, which is very extendable, people like to add lots of like really specific different things, which they can do in WordPress. They can't do that in MailChimp. So our plugin kind of lets them add all of these things and create like a more robust publishing platform that's like highly specific and customized to their needs.
Yeah. I think what's sort of entertaining about this as well is that there's this like two worlds in your life, right? Where you're at like world level ultimate player, and then you're running this business, and people don't actually know, like, you know, like the people in one world don't know about this other world, the people in this world doesn't know about that other world, you know. And when I met you, I actually met you because of your business, not because of the ultimate thing, because I don't play ultimate. And then we sort of like, you know, became friends, and then I was like sort of mind blown by the depth of pedagogical thought that you have. So to listeners who sort of like listening about this and sort of like thinking like, why is it so weird that, you know, there's this like abrupt shift, it's because this is the nature of it is not like some weird like dichotomy. This is actually how you run things as well, right? People don't know that you are this amazing ultimate coach in the background. So
yeah, but that's common, right? Like I'm sure you also have like all these crazy dichotomies, because like online is like such a like specific sliver of your life, right? And you can't just talk about a million things. It's hard to.
I think maybe the difference between you and me is that I gush about judo a lot. I can't control my, even though I'm not actually that great a judo player anymore. I'm so rusty. 10 years I've not played, right? And you're still in the thick of things, and you don't talk about. Yeah, okay, well, 2016, fair, but also like you were coaching as recently as 2020, and I feel like more people should know the kind of thought that you've put into the pedagogy of things, because it is quite rare, I feel. Yeah, so where can people find you online?
I guess the easiest is on Twitter, so I'm at Lesley Lesley _pizza PIZZA on Twitter, so you can find me there. And my handle is Lesley Pizza on most places online. So if you just kind of Google that, you should be able to find me as well. And Newsletter Glue is newsletterglue.com.
Yes, and your personal website, I believe, is leslie.pizza.
Yep.
And I'm going to link to that in the show notes as well. Well, we're at time. We've gone a bit over time, but I think it was worth it. Thank you so much for your time, Lesley. This was an honor.
Thanks, Cedric. It's always super fun talking to you. Bye.
Bye.